159 new coronavirus cases on Tuesday. Peaceful demonstrations took place at Oxford University in the United Kingdom on Tuesday, demanding the removal of the statue of a 19th century British colonialist. Nigerian health authorities announced on Monday that over 50% of undetermined deaths in Kano province were caused by COVID-19. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez offered a report on COVID-19 figures on Tuesday. Rodriguez reported one locally transmitted COVID-19 case and 158 imported cases, of which 2 cases came from Ecuador, 147 from Colombia, and 9 cases were people who had contact with people who had returned from abroad. The Venezuelan official also noted that there are more than 25,000 available beds for COVID-19 patients at healthcare institutions across the country. Venezuela's COVID-19 figures now stand at more than 2,600 cases and 23 deaths. Indigenous peoples in Colombia say they fear the coronavirus pandemic could wipe out their elders. The community of Ticuna in the Colombian Amazon say COVID-19 could kill its aging leaders and spiritual guides. They fear the proximity with Brazil, the epicenter of the pandemic in South America, could lead to a surge in infections.
If they, spiritual and cultural leaders, die here in our department, obviously we would be left with young people who in the future would know nothing of our cultures, practices and customs, so that is what we are afraid of. Because if we lose our grandparents, we are left without a leader who would be in charge of us, to guide us, to give us all the information, and so we cannot lose the culture of what we do here in our Amazon region.
A volcano erupted in Ecuador's Amazon region on Tuesday, leaving several cities covered in ash. The Sangay volcano has had moderate eruptions for over a year, but a recent change in wind patterns pushed the ash toward the coast and affected areas including the largest city of Ecuador, Guayaquil. This has fueled concerns of the potential health impact of the ash in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, as the South American nation is still dealing with a brutal outbreak of COVID-19. Ecuador's Geophysical Institute stated that it expects minor volcanic eruptions to continue in the coming days, although no major eruption is expected. After 3 months of national lockdown due to the COVID-19 crisis in Honduras, some businesses have started to reopen their doors. But many business owners stress they have incurred significant debts due to the losses of the past few months.
Merchants have started to take back to the streets hoping to sell their wares, but they agree the economic crisis is severe.
The economy is in shambles. Prices are beyond most people's reach, especially of basic items.
In the main cities of Honduras, the government authorized business to reopen at 20% of capacity, but for many, after 3 months with no income, this is impossible.
I'm closing down my business. I had been planning to reopen it for the past month. I have a couple of other businesses, but during the lockdown, they never stopped sending us the light bill, the water bill, nothing. They never stopped charging us for services.
As debts mounted, they received no support from the state, and small business were the first to go.
I cannot pay my employees. I'm in a deep hole and I can't see a way out. They should have planned ahead. They should have told us we'd have to close down for most of the year, so then we could have shut down our businesses and liquidated our employees.
The outlook for small business owners, who represent 40% of all businesses in Honduras, is bleak. The same can be said for the nation's economy.
An article written in The Economist said that Honduras will see its economy tumble by at least 4.4%, which would be a historic figure. We've never seen such a drop, and it will widen the gap for those living in poverty and extreme poverty.
Some small business will need to choose between reopening or firing part of their staff.
We have received no help from state institutions, nor from private institutions. We continue to work, to fight every day. We've had to fire many people, and the situation is still critical, because our debt is big and we are struggling to pay it.
Authorities have announced a relief fund for ABNK credits, but small business owners say this measure does not help them because they would be charged penalties and be tied down to a larger debt.
Hilda Silvestrucci, Telesur, Honduras.
The U.S. imposed Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico has filed a complaint over accusations the island's government made irregular purchases of COVID-19 test kits for more than $38 million. The complaint filed with the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico seeks to force the government to present documents related to the negotiations of contracts to acquire COVID-19 test kits and other medical supplies during the state of emergency. The move comes after irregular sales to the Ministry of Health by APEC General Contractors, a company with no experience in the field of medicine, of 1 million COVID-19 test kits for $38 million, 19 million of which were paid in advance. The deal, initiated by a lawyer of former Governor Ricardo Rosselló, failed when the Oriental Bank warned federal authorities about an irregular transfer by the Ministry of Finance. Social organisations in Guyana are calling for outgoing President David Granger to accept his defeat in the March 2nd elections. Smaller political parties have requested that the Electoral Commission release the final results as soon as possible, after 3 months of delays and accusations of irregularities in the polls. The final recount and the tabulation of ballots was completed on Sunday, with preliminary results giving the opposition People's Progressive Party Civic the lead. Several sectors have now called on Granger to accept the result and allow for a peaceful transition of power. One of Cuba's greatest poets, Roberto Fernández Retamar, would have celebrated his 90th birthday on Tuesday. Fernández Retamar was a poet, essayist, literary critic and president of the Casa de las Americas. In his role as the latter, he also served on Cuba's Council of State. He was also a close confidant of commanders Ernesto Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, and remained a central figure of Cuban culture until his death in 2019. His best-known work is Caliban, an in-depth and highly celebrated study of culture in Latin America.
Above all, he was a man who was consistent with his thoughts, his country, his beliefs, and showed all of them absolutely loyalty.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. This Tuesday saw the funeral of George Floyd in Houston, where he is to be buried alongside his mother. Civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton offered the eulogy, which he began by welcoming the mothers of other African Americans present, whose sons or daughters were also killed by police.
Cops had done to one white what was done to George. They wouldn't have to teach no new lessons. They wouldn't have to get corporations to get money. They would send them to jail. And until we know the price for black life is the same as the price for white life, we're going to keep coming back to these situations over and over again. Either the law will work or it won't work.
And Reverend Al Sharpton also criticised President Donald Trump for his response to the killing of George Floyd and the subsequent protests.
We are fighting an institutional, systemic problem that has been allowed to permeate since we were brought to these shores. And we are fighting wickedness in high places. The president talks about bringing in the military, but he not said one word about 8 minutes and 46 seconds of police murder of George Floyd.
Peaceful demonstrations took place at Oxford University in the United Kingdom on Tuesday, demanding the removal of the statue of 19th century British colonialist Cecil Rhodes. Protesters gathered at Oriel College to demand the removal of the statue, pointing to the colonialist violence and racism it represents, a legacy still celebrated in the UK. Despite previous demands to take the statue down in 2016, college authorities decided to keep it. Demonstrations have taken place across the UK to protest against police brutality and racism, including a protest at Bristol Harbour where the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was pulled down and thrown into the water. Meanwhile, an official campaign to remove Rhodes' statue from the university has been lodged. And a statue of King Leopold II was removed in the city of Antwerp, Belgium, in the midst of anti-racism protests. The statue was pulled down just days after it was daubed with paint by anti-racism protesters. According to Johan Vermont, a spokesman for Antwerp's mayor, Bart de Wever, the statue will not be returning to its pedestal and instead will become part of a museum collection. Statues of the 19th century king have long been a target of activists because of his record of brutal colonial rule in Belgium's former Central African colonies, where millions were killed. Tour guides in Rome organised a flash mob in front of the Pantheon and sitting outside the Italian Parliament on Tuesday in protest at what they see as a lack of government support for the tourism sector. Dressed in black, those gathered protested by stomping their feet and shouting, "Without tourism, Italy dies." The tour guides say they feel invisible and are demanding financial aid from the government to see them through to next March, when they hope tourism will return to its normal levels. Greece and Italy signed an agreement on maritime boundaries this Tuesday, delimiting an exclusive economic zone between the two countries. The deal, which was signed by Greek Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias and his Italian counterpart Luigi Di Maio during the latter's visit to Athens, follows a long period of tension in the eastern Mediterranean region, where Turkey has signed a controversial maritime delimitation agreement with Libya and has commenced offshore drilling, provoking criticism from Cyprus, Greece and Israel. This Tuesday, Ethiopia reported 190 new coronavirus cases and 5 fatalities. According to the Ministry of Health, the number of confirmed cases is growing fast in the country. A report published on the Cabinet's official website noted that Ethiopia has reported over 2,000 positive cases and 32 COVID-19 fatalities so far. Meanwhile, 4,599 samples were analysed in the last 24 hours, with 55 women and 135 men testing positive for the virus. Police repressed a protest by vendors in Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who are trying to force their way into the main central market. The market has been closed for 2 months due to the coronavirus lockdown.
Already in the last few days, there has been misinformation among the population that the big market, which is closed because of the lockdown, is being destroyed. Their goods are disappearing, going up in smoke, when in truth, this is not the case.
And we're taking one last short break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Nigerian health authorities announced on Monday that over 50% of undetermined deaths in Kano province were caused by COVID-19. Fatalities skyrocketed to 43 deaths per day in early April in the city of Kano, but back then health authorities claimed that the deaths were not COVID-19 related and were caused by malaria, diabetes, hypertension and other diseases. However, on Monday, Health Minister Dr. Osagi and Henry has stated that medical investigations now suggest that around 50 to 60% of those deaths were indeed caused by the novel coronavirus. The official COVID-19 figures in Nigeria stand at over 12,000 cases and more than 300 deaths. The South African Medical Association called on the government to ban alcohol sales this Tuesday. According to Association chairperson Angelique Coetzee, since an alcohol sales ban was lifted on June 1st, the number of patients with alcohol-related injuries has been rising at casualty and trauma units, putting pressure on an already overstretched public health system, lacking resources for COVID-19 patients. Doctors stress they are already overwhelmed, while some provincial leaders said they would be approaching the COVID-19 national team to propose an alcohol ban. And the COVID-19 death toll rose by 82 this Tuesday to reach over 1,100. South Africa remains the worst hit nation in Africa, having reported almost 53,000 confirmed coronavirus cases so far. It also ranks second in terms of deaths after Egypt. The government has been gradually easing the restrictions imposed in March, with some schoolchildren allowed to return to classes and the majority of businesses reopening. People gathered in the capital of Senegal, Dakar, this Tuesday to pay tribute to murdered African-American George Floyd, another victim of police brutality in the United States.
It was important for Senegal to show its support, to organize this event, but also and above all, it is important to tell all Africans to take responsibility. If we want black people to be respected throughout the world, Africa must be big, Africa must be sovereign, Africa must be strong to have its sons and daughters respected throughout the world. This is intolerable. This is unacceptable. It is unacceptable because it is cruel. It is unacceptable because it is racist. It is unacceptable because it is unfair. If he died for that, he died for us. That means we are all George Floyd.
Nigeria is easing lockdown restrictions over the novel coronavirus as the government issued directives that will see a progressive reopening of the North African country in the coming weeks. While some shops have started to reopen, a partial mandatory lockdown will remain in force in most of the country until June 13th. Business owners say that as soon as the government announced the reopening instructions, they contacted employees to prepare for the change. Hand sanitizer dispensers are being installed in all stores, and there will also be strict rules over the number of people that can be inside at any one time. Syrian authorities reported 2 new cases of COVID-19 on Tuesday. According to the Ministry of Health, the country has registered 146 positive cases, while the death toll stands at 6 and 62 patients have recovered so far. Syria has kept its borders closed and primary and secondary schools shut. Authorities recently suspended the daily curfew and authorized transportation between provinces. Police in Nepal fired water cannons at demonstrators in Kathmandu on Tuesday who had gathered to protest against the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis. The protesters, carrying banners reading "Enough is enough," demanded better testing and quarantine facilities for returning migrant workers. They also called for greater transparency in government spending. Nepal imposed a nationwide lockdown on March 24th when the country had just 2 confirmed COVID-19 cases. As of Tuesday, the number of cases stands at over 3,000, while 14 COVID-19 fatalities have been reported. French pop singer Camelia Jordana and others came together to sing an a cappella version of the classic civil rights anthem "We Shall Overcome" during a tribute to George Floyd in Paris. The gospel song has been heard in recent demonstrations against police brutality and racism. And we finished this news brief with a clip of the performance. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website as well as on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.